Thank you, Doug. Thank you for making me a bit nervous about speaking. What I thought, well, to start with, there are some things about Egypt during the last years which are simple to say something about. For example, yes, there was a military coup on the 3rd of July 2013. Doesn't mean that we can't discuss it, but to me that's simple. Otherwise, this story about the developments from the fall of Mubarak in 2011 and until the fall of Mursi, or the ousting of Mursi in 2013, is highly complex. It's a highly complex phenomenon to study. And there is a lot, of course, we don't know, both because the factors at work are very highly complex, because a lot of the central actors are in jail and have been, just to a very small degree, able to communicate with the outer world since the coup. So we don't have their voice, and we can't interview them and hear their view. And otherwise, also, the climate for speaking openly about politics in Egypt today is not the best. So what I will say today is sort of preliminary. It is it's a work in progress on my part, trying to sort of sort out and understand, hopefully by the time, more and more aspects of, and get a more precise understanding of what was going on during this period, because this is a crucial period in order to learn about Egypt, learn about what went before, and also hopefully what comes after. So, but there are obviously lots of things that that would merit discussing, that I will not touch upon, at least not in the introductory talk. Then in Q&A session we can perhaps delve into more issues. I do not claim this to be the full, true story of what happened, but what I will try to do, I would try to challenge some views, some points of analysis of what's been going on that are rather commonly mentioned in the press, but also by some scholars, and then suggest some points of analysis towards the end. I get nervous when my hands shake. Now, so let's, no, other way. Yes. Let's start out with a nice book. It's a book title from Tolkien, I think. The book is about the hobbits, isn't it? There and back again. And here what's there and back again is Egypt on its way to at least, well, if not democracy, at least a couple of rather free elections, and back again. I won't go in detail through this, just to remind us of some formal, but still not only formal, important aspects of what happened during this period. Of course, the period that we might call the transition period, supposed to be a transition towards democracy, it started with the resignation of President Mubarak on the 11th of February 2011. Power was taken over by a sort of a collective presidency, the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces, who ruled unchallengedly from February 2011 to June 2012. Pretty soon after the fall of Mubarak, there was established a roadmap for this transition. There was a small committee established, headed by the renowned scholar Tariq al-Bishri, a legal scholar and a more or less independent, more or less Islamist, also by political leanings. The Bishri committee suggested, by late February, I think, a few changes to the constitution basically meant to open the way for free elections, mandating judiciary supervision of the election, which had been an old demand of the opposition in Egypt, making it easier to be a candidate, opening up, making the political climate around elections more free. And also, crucially, they suggested that as a transitional article to the Constitution, that when after elections, fresh elections to Parliament had taken place, the Parliament, with both its chambers, should gather and select a constitutional committee of 100 members who would then write the new constitution for Egypt to be then accepted in a referendum. So that was the roadmap established. It was the first stages of it was more or less followed, albeit by a delay. Parliament was elected in late 2011, early 2012, and then presidential elections took place in June 2012. But, so I said the roadmap was partially followed, because by the time the president was elected, the newly elected parliament had already been dissolved by court order. It is interesting to jump ahead a bit to see that when the court decided to dissolve the parliament in June 2012, they argued that there was something unconstitutional about the election of this parliament. And they said that because for this first parliament after the revolution, it was, if I'm not mistaken on the percentage here, but let's say more or less 2/3 were elected on party lists, and 1/3 was elected in individual seats. And so the constitutional, so the court that dissolved the parliament said that since independent individuals could not run for the party lists, it was unfair that the parties were allowed to run candidates for the individual seats. Now, the system as it stood, with the parties able to run also for the individual seats, had been at the time, in the fall of 2011, a common demand from the whole spectrum of political parties, Muslim Brothers and all the other secular parties. Because they feared that if 1/3 was left to individual seats, that would mean a way back, opening back in for the Mubarak people, who could manipulate the local constituencies. Still, when the parliament was dissolved, it was almost only the Islamists, who by then dominated the parliament, who protested. All the other parties, which had supported this particular election law through demonstrations in the streets, said nothing, and we'll understand that why. The other thing about this, the one thing that the parliament finally was able to do before it was dissolved was to establish this constitutional committee of 100, or constitutional assembly of 100 people. But that hadn't gone smoothly either. First, Parliament in March, end of March, came up with the first constitutional assembly, which was challenged by most of the secular opposition because they said it was too dominated by Islamists. And so then the last thing the Parliament was able to, they also went to the courts with that, and the courts from administrative court in Cairo said it's unconstitutional. Interestingly enough, because the Constitution said nothing about how this committee of 100 should be elected. But the last thing the Parliament was able to do before it was dissolved was to come up with a new composition of the Constitutional Assembly, which was also challenged, but the balance had shifted somewhat to a less Islamist dominance, and this committee went to work. Just after that, there was presidential election where Mohammed Mursi from the Muslim Brothers won in the second round with a narrow margin over a candidate close to the Mubarak system, Ahmed Shafiq. But before he was sworn in on the 30th of June, the Supreme Council of Armed Forces had stripped the presidency of several powers. They took away from the presidency the supreme command of the armed forces. The Supreme Council of the Armed Forces took over legislative powers. So why is that? Why does that have something to do with the presidency? It does, because according to Egyptian constitutional practice, when there's no parliament, the presidency has always had the power to decree laws, legislative powers. So that would naturally have passed to Mursi when he was sworn in as president. To avoid that, the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces, who were supposed at that point, which they had declared, to give up powers to the elected president, they now said, no, we'll keep the legislative powers until a new parliament is elected, which at the time there existed no roadmap towards. And on several other points also they reduced the powers of the president. Now, to move on, in November 2012 comes a crucial point in Mursi's presidency, and the one perhaps that set the stage for his downfall, at least that the downfall came at the time when it came. In late November 2012, or in November 2012, 21st of November, actually, he came out with a decree saying that, to put it short, that all his decrees and decisions were immune against being tested in the courts. And also, crucially, that the Constitutional Assembly was immune towards any decision in the courts to dissolve it. This was very important because the first Constitutional Assembly had been shut down by the courts. Now there was again a new case against the Constitutional Assembly that had been working through the fall, 2012. And a decision from the Supreme Constitutional Court was expected early December. So Mursi did this to immunize the Constitutional Assembly until they had finished the Constitution, and in order to avoid having the process thrown open again. But it generated a lot of protest, and from now on he was portrayed as a dictator, which had usurped powers. We'll get back to that a little bit. Anyway, the Constitutional Assembly finished the Constitution, and it was accepted in a referendum in December 2012. Mursi kept on as president, but as we know, 3rd of July 2013, after huge protests in the streets of Cairo and other cities on 30th of June against Mursi, the army moved in and deposed him, and the constitution was suspended. Now, I want to take up some myths about this period. First, about the 4 myths about the Muslim Brotherhood and what they did, and then that and a final, get to a final myth as well. First of all, there's this idea that's been around that the Muslim Brotherhood somehow stole the revolution. The revolution was made by others, then the Muslim Brothers came in and stole it. That's one thing that keeps being repeated over and over and over again, both in the press and even in scholarly articles, and that is that the Muslim Brothers were latecomers to the revolution. Some youth made the revolution, and then the Muslim Brothers gradually woke up and hurried around. Thing is that the youth of the Muslim Brothers were part and parcel of those groups of youth that, I mean, not the dominant one, but one important constituent part of those groups that called for the first demonstration, which is seen to have started the revolution on 25th of January. The Muslim Brotherhood main organization at that time said that did not come out as an organization to officially support the demonstration. They said something a bit unclear, but said that members were free to join, and their youth openly supported it and were part of organizing it. On the 26th of January, after the first big demonstration on the 25th, the Muslim Brothers openly called for going to the streets, challenging the regime. So, of course, it's one day after, but to see them as latecomers to the revolution is very far off the mark. Also, the victory of this movement against Mubarak would have been impossible without the Muslim Brothers. This is saying impossible is, of course, a judgment, but they played an extremely important part when they mobilized their organization, the only nationwide strong organization that on the non-state, among the non-state actors. It meant a lot. It added a lot to the numbers of the demonstration, both in Cairo and not least throughout the country, because there were demonstrations all over Egypt. It also was important in other ways. For example, though the Muslim Brothers were not alone doing that, but they, through their strong position among the doctors, medical doctors in Egypt, they mobilized in field hospitals in Tahrir and medical assistance, also supplies, food supplies, other stuff that helped organize and strengthen and sustain the demonstrations. And also, when talking about stealing, so one thing is that they were there from early on. They were important for its victory. And if you talk about stealing it, well, if they stole it through being the most popular movement among the people. So when one of the demands of the revolution, which is free elections, took place, the Muslim Brothers were the strongest and came out with the most votes. Which is hardly stealing, I would say, if the premise is that free elections is one of the demands. Yet, that doesn't mean that there developed after the victory of the revolution a gradual split among the Muslim Brothers, or between the Muslim Brothers and the revolutionaries. When I put the revolutionaries in, it's not to say that they were not revolutionaries, but it's just that the term Thawar is a fought-over term in Egypt, and sometimes it's used and sometimes even accepted to designate a certain group of youth, so at least non-Islamist youth, who were non-Islamist youth or youth organizations that contained both Islamists and others, but did not have an Islamist program, like 6th of April movement, for example. They developed a split between at least the main organization of the Muslim Brothers and these revolutionaries. When these revolutionaries, quote unquote, pressed on with the demands, wanted immediate, for example, justice, people responsible for killing demonstrators put in front of the courts and punished. When workers would be pushing for better pay and other things. When demonstrators went on to demonstrate in the streets, gradually there was more and more friction with the brothers, because I think primarily because from the moment when the roadmap was established, the Brotherhood put all priority into that. Now things must move on and elections must come and elected institutions must be established, and anything that risks troubling that or gives the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces a reason for stopping the process must be avoided. And this is very glaringly put in a statement from the brothers the day after the Maspero massacre, which was in fall 2011, when primarily Copts demonstrated against discrimination and mistreatment of Copts, and when 28 people were killed by I don't know, nobody has been sentenced for it, but by military security forces. The Muslim Brothers came out with a statement, which I just highlighted some issues. They said, yeah, there are many legitimate demands, but certainly this is not the right time to claim them, says the brothers. And later on, wisdom dictates patience and prudence. Wait for a government elected by the people. It's very clearly stated. This is the important thing. Let's avoid demonstrations, avoid anything risking trouble. And then especially on the eve of free elections that we have always sought. And this attitude, especially because, as in the Maspero incident, when 28 demonstrators were killed, and the Muslim Brothers didn't come out sort of with primarily challenging those who killed them, but came out with a statement like this, it obviously worked to separate these revolutionaries from the brothers. Myth number 2, Muslim brother misgovernance. You hear a lot. When I take up these myths, it's because they are common. One thing is people who support the current regime in Egypt, but also among, journalists, opinion makers, scholars who are critical towards the current government, the regime of Sisi. It is still, some of these myths are still common. So one of them was that the Muslim Brothers stole the revolution. Another is that the Mursi period was sort of a terrible disaster of misgovernance. Everything went to pieces. Now, there are some problems with that. Myths may be true, by the way, but just myth. It's a strongly symbolic, story that is believed. But the problems with this myth, one is that they were never fully in power. They had a majority in parliament, but then the parliament was dissolved. And when they tried, by the way, earlier in February, when the new parliament gathered, which had not all-out majority for the Muslim Brothers, when Muslim Brothers together with other Islamists had a majority. When the Muslim Brothers tried to call for the SCAF to name a new government based on the majority in parliament, they were just flatly rejected. So they never had any influence on government in that period. Then the parliament was dissolved. Then Mursi came in as president, shorn of a lot of powers, and without any parliament to support him. And so this is meant to be a bit symbolic of the situation, this Mursi a bit alone among the officers, because I think it reflects a lot of the situation. Also, in the first government named by Mursi, it was led by a non-Muslim brother, and it was, I think, 5 of 34 ministers were Muslim brothers. That increased through a couple of changes of ministers. But still, I think just before Mursi fell, it was not the majority, but it got closer to about 50%. They were also, well, sabotage is a strong word. At least the state organs did not necessarily move according to the will of Mursi and his government. The military basically did what it wanted, even after Mursi had changed some top military staff and put in the new guy Sisi in August 2012. Sorry. And the police had, during the revolution against Mubarak, had basically withdrawn from a lot of its common tasks, like ordering the traffic and dealing with criminals and so on. And also it was, during the Mursi period, it stayed away from most of those tasks, contributing to a feeling of insecurity among the population. And also being, protecting the presidency against demonstrators throwing Molotov cocktails on some instances and then withdrawing on others, rather erratic. Also the bureaucracy in general, there's not only sabotage, it's also the fact that, of course, Mursi took over as president with a, according to all the literature on the subject, highly dysfunctional, overgrown Egyptian bureaucracy, and it was, of course, the same. And when they come inexperienced of government, they had experience in leading their own organization and in leading charities and so on, but no clear plan. That's granted. I mean, it's not that there were no problems. They were inexperienced, and they didn't have a very clear economic program, and certainly no clear program on how to reform this bureaucracy when they came in. So they were individuals coming in as ministers and supposing to set this bureaucracy moving. It didn't work. They did also unwise things, as when Mursi made a highly, in the election campaign, it said that within 100 days I'd deal with the traffic, for example. And then someone established a Mursi meter and could show that there was not so much progress, and it's worth to criticize it. Then, but also, when it comes to the economic record, I mean, I would say I'm not in a position to make judgment on the Mursi presidency. But I have not seen, although in the oft-repeated statement that this was a disaster for Egypt, I have never seen any documentation, any analysis. What was the situation for the economy? What did the Mursi government do? Which effect did it have? And there's nothing to show that after Mursi left, that things have suddenly turned for the better, except that there were certain things that happened just the day he fell, that suddenly gas was more available, electricity was more available, which could not have happened just because he fell. It had happened for other reasons. In the spring of 2013, as you probably know, there was a campaign started called Tamarrud, which led directly to the fall of Mursi. This was a campaign to gather 12 million signatures. Well, the point is they wanted to gather more signatures than Mursi had gotten votes for, and calling for early presidential elections and the resignation of Mursi. And this Tamarrud, this is in honor of you, those of you who read Arabic, but it's a very short statement. It says, because security has not returned to the streets, we don't want you. Because the poor has no place, we don't want you. Because we are still begging from the foreign countries, we don't want you. Because the martyrs haven't gotten justice, we don't want you. Because there's no dignity for me and for my country, we don't want you. Because the economy is, is going down the drain and is based on begging again, we don't want you. Because our country is dependent on America, we don't want you. And it goes on like this, and just then we call for resignation. So this is, and this is basically, I mean, if anyone has more information on this, it's good. But this is basically, I would say, in a very shortened form, but still it's the level of this argumentation that Mursi was a catastrophe. Because all these, of course, things are things that were there in the Mubarak era and are still there now. Now, then there's the thing that Mursi became an autocrat, a new dictator, that he betrayed sort of the fledgling democracy. I would say that there's no very clear argument, except perhaps the November decree, and we'll get to the November decree of 2012. But otherwise, there's no clear argument that the brothers did not adhere to procedural democracy. I mean, they were in positions of power, not in power with a big P, but in some positions of power, because they had been elected in elections that everyone considered, or all observers considered, to be the freest that had taken place in Egypt, and with just minor problems. Crucially, they upheld the post-revolutionary freedoms. There's a lot of discussion whether the fall of Mubarak, the demonstrations against Mubarak on 11th of February when he left, was a revolution or not. And there are many arguments for or against that, not least in light of what has happened since. But it was a revolution of freedom for the time being, because some laws were changed gradually, but most of our people just took the freedom, published what they wanted to, organized what they wanted to, demonstrated what they wanted to. And by and large, through the period, I mean, the break in that is 3rd of July 2013, and not when Mursi became president. Mursi himself was, of course, challenged as no president in Egypt has ever been anything close to him. We had this was the heyday of Bassem Youssef, who has now sadly disappeared from Egyptian TV screens. And there's a famous episode where he made fun of Mursi having been granted an honorary doctorate at the Pakistani University and been dressed in this hat. So Bassem Youssef, I didn't get that, but he also came with a hat this size to show the ridiculous, how ridiculous this was. There was a lot of talk at the time about the Ikhwanizing of the state, from Ikhwan, which means brothers in Arabic. So the brothers were taking over the state. This is a hard one to finally decide on, but as I said, in the government there was a minority of Muslim brothers throughout. Obviously, there were Muslim brothers being put in different positions, some as governors, but not a majority of governors in Egypt's provinces, but only gradually also. And it was probably a centrally placed Muslim brotherhood whom I talked to in the fall of 2012 was more to the point when he said people are afraid of Akhwanat al-Dawla, the Ikhwanization of the state, but the problem that I see is the Dawlanat al-Ikhwan, the statification of the Ikhwan, meaning that the Ikhwan are being sort of going into positions in the state and being caught up there, trying to deal with this bureaucracy and weakening the organization, its ability to act among the people. Let me move a little bit faster because of the time. So, was the November decree of Mursi, it looks like a break with democratic procedure, because he says, my decisions are above all the courts in the country. Yeah, obviously this is not nice, but we cannot talk about it without talking about which particular court we are talking about, especially the Supreme Constitutional Court, which was dominated by Mubarak age judges who had shown before on several occasions they were willing to use their power to disrupt this roadmap that had been voted in a referendum, and was when they dissolved the parliament, when they dissolved the first constitutional assembly, they were acting without any clear reference to the constitution, and they had created this situation where there was no parliament in the country. So Mursi's argument was he did it as during a limited period to see through the country to a new constitution. And anyway, that was how he acted. After the constitution had been established, he withdrew the decree, and he also did something else. He tried to bring back a parliament. This is a bit complicated, but the parliament that had been elected in 2011-2012 consisted of two chambers. One was the People's Assembly, Majlis al-Shab, which had legislative power, and which was then dissolved. So there was no legislative parliament. But there was another chamber, the Majlis al-Shura, the Consultative Council, which nobody cared about at the time because it had never had any powers during the Mubarak time. It was just there to give some advantages to some Mubarak cronies at the time. And when it was elected in 2011, 2012, not much people cared either. While 54% voted in the elections for the People's Assembly, only 11% voted for the Consultative Council, because it means nothing. Which meant that the Islamists got an even larger dominance in this Consultative Council. What Mursi did was, after the new constitution had been voted in, this constitution held a clause saying that until a new parliament has been elected, the Majlis Shura, a transitional clause saying that the Majlis Shura, the Consultative Council, will now be legislative assembly. And so he gave away legislative powers from himself and to this Majlis Shura. But more importantly, perhaps and then this parliament set about making a new election law, which was needed to have fresh elections after the new constitution and get a full-fledged new parliament. But that was shut down time and again by the Supreme Constitutional Court, finding always argument that it was somehow unconstitutional. There was something wrong with the way they divided the constituencies or something. So, and yeah, there were a lot of problems with the brothers but not, I would say, not primarily in the way they dealt with democratic procedure. But for people trying to cooperate with the brothers, there were a lot of problems, because the Muslim Brothers is a highly centralized organization with centralized decision making, and which makes it hard where any major decision would go all the way up to the non-state organ with the leadership of the Muslim Brothers, the Maktab al-Irshad, the Guidance Council, and then they would decide and might decide and did time and again against what some negotiators for the brothers had agreed with others. This created a lot of problems. And also, of course, as demonstrations against the president grew, especially after the November decree, this split which I talked about earlier between the brothers and the revolutionaries grew, because Mursi was seen to be protecting himself behind the police and leaning on that. And this, so let me just see how far behind I am. Yeah, let me move a bit faster. There's a myth about Islamization. Basically, I think there was no great Islamization taking place during this period. There was a debate in the Constitutional Assembly on the place of the Sharia. And the Salafis, this must be remembered, that besides the brothers, which got roughly 40% of the votes for the parliament, the Salafis had got 25%, or even 28% of the vote, I think, but 25% of the seats in parliament. And this was also reflected in their position in the Constitutional Assembly. So it means that the more conservative Salafis had a strong position. Then they were trying to call for more implementation of Sharia. Of course, as you probably know, since 1981, the Egyptian constitution had in its Article 2 that the principles of the Sharia are the main source of legislation in the country. And there was somehow a consensus among all groups that this should be kept on. Most groups, even the brothers initially wanted primarily to keep it there. Then that's what we don't go any further. As it were, two other articles came into the constitution. One pushed on partly by the Salafis, which was that Article 219, which specified what the principles of the Sharia meant, which basically would boil down to that the principle of the Sharia should be read according to the main Sunni legal schools and what they agreed upon, which might possibly be used as a way of strengthening the implementation of Sharia, but still it was it was a principle to be implemented and discussed according to each discussion of each law. And then as important, I think, is Article 4, which was debated a lot. Article 4 deals with al-Azhar, the main institution of religious learning in Egypt. And there is a clause saying that the view of al-Azhar of the Council of Higher Ulama of al-Azhar should be heard in issues to do with Sharia. If I had time, I would play you a little video, but this would put to the test, because some people said, oh, this means veto power for the ulama. The Muslim Brothers said, no, it just means that they're going to be heard. And it was put to the test in a debate in this Majlis Shura, Consultative Council, when they acted as a legislative parliament in the spring of 2013, when they were discussing a law on government bonds, which Al-Azhar had declared. The issue is not really important here, but the point is that Al-Azhar, leading Al-Azhar scholars, had declared that this law on bonds was contrary to Islamic law. The Muslim Brothers wanted this law, so Isam al-Arian, one of the leading spokesmen, stood in Parliament and said that yes, it is true, Article 4 says Sharia the Al-Azhar should be heard. We have heard them. They are not elected. We are elected to do legislation. And he went as far as saying that we are here involved in a collective ijtihad. We, the elected representatives of people, must try as much as we can to understand the Sharia and so on, and then vote accordingly. And let's vote in this law. So at least from the point of view of the Muslim Brothers, this Al-Azhar issue was not intended as a veto power for the ulama. Now, moving towards the end, I'll be going for 5, 10 minutes, maximum 10 minutes. Now, one thing is these things which I have called myths and which I have tried to at least make problematic. So what was going on then? I think, and now this, so I think first of all we need to see what was going on as a conflict between competing elites within Egyptian society. It's a huge debate and it's a complex issue, of course, so to talk about it we need to simplify, and then I would simplify by saying that the educated middle classes, which have always, or at least since the fall of the old landowning class, have been dominating Egyptian politics, are divided in two somehow. There is a secular elite that doesn't. It's a vague term, I know, but it is an elite which somehow has seen sort of the modernizing West as the source of legitimation of policies, of decisions on how to move, and also the source of the culture that they were interested in promoting. And this secular elite has been dominating Egyptian politics probably since the beginning of Egyptian independence, and certainly since 1950. It is again divided in two because parts of it have been occupying state power to various degrees, positions in the state, in the undemocratic system. Other parts of it have been oppositional, have run sort of socialist, communist parties, Nasserist party after Nasser died and policies were changed. But then outside this divided secular elite, there has existed since the 1930s at least, an alternative elite, an Islamist elite, where the main political expression has been the Muslim Brothers, which have tried to challenge the established elite through focusing on or portraying themselves, if you want, as being the ones true to the faith, true to Islam, which is the basis of moral norms in societies, and make that a platform for reform, but also a platform for challenging the established elite. Now, if we, for the discussion, accept these three positions, then I would say what happened during the revolution, the short phase of early 2011, was that part of the secular elite, which had been in opposition to the Mubarak sort of corrupt, undemocratic system, and the Islamist counter-elite found together in the crucial weeks of January and February, and were able to, while also being able to play on contradictions inside, or working with contradictions inside the Mubarak regime, but they were able to topple, to create a situation where Mubarak had to go, and where the military was pressured into opening up for greater freedoms and for a democratic process. But very soon, this alliance between the secular opposition and the Islamist opposition, I mean the secular opposition against Mubarak and Islamist opposition, fell apart again. And then there's a three-way struggle, as it were, with the Islamists led by the Ikhwan on the one hand, with the state elite and its main power organs of state, of army, police, judiciary on the other hand, and then the secular elite in the third, as a third position. And the last one is the one with the least ability to mobilize resources. The Islamists have a huge network and organization in society that can mobilize resources. Obviously, the state can. The secular elite can mobilize some big demonstrations, but they have far less resources to bring into the game. Now, we can really move on. So a few words about the secular elite. There again, as this played out in the revolutionary period, again we need to divide. If we go into those part of the secular elite that were in opposition against Mubarak, that joined the revolution at some stage, there is, of course, a continuum, but there is on the one side the old system liberals, as it were. For example, the leadership in the political parties that had been legal during Mubarak, and some that had been not legal but able to function, like the WAFT, like the Tagamwa, the leftist party, and others. And then there were the young revolutionaries in the street, the 6th of April, and other movement, the revolutionary socialists, and so on. Early on, these found together in challenging the Islamists, very early on, when this roadmap was established in early 2011, because there was a debate of a constitution first or election first. The argument from the Islamist side, from the Muslim Brothers, was that now there has been a revolution, but it is the military who hold power. We need to move swiftly to elections to create institutions with a popular mandate. That's the only way we can establish the platform for really a democratic development, which is plausible, but also they did so well aware that they had great chance of winning those elections. On the other hand, the seculars had another argument, which is also quite plausible, saying that we're coming out of 50 years of autocracy. We need a constitution, we need a consensus constitution which creates sort of a trust among all groups that the new system will be not played by one part against the others and so on. It's a common platform, and then we can go to elections, which is possible. On the other hand, when they made that argument, they knew fully well that one part of the situation was that if elections came fast, they would lose. So, and a very short way of putting it is that sort of this situation was a very difficult one because there existed the trust that is needed to establish a democratic system did not exist among the various part of those who had come together to push Mubarak to fall and then push the opening for a new development. So, as for the secular elite, they said that they accorded, while they had been part of those calling for free elections to take place, when those elections had taken place, they accorded no particular legitimacy to those institutions, to the parliament and to the constitutional assembly. Because now, after the election, after the fact, these were seen as just, there's another phase for the Muslim Brothers. There's an age-old conflict between us and the Muslim Brothers. Now they have taken the parliament. This is a problem. We need to challenge it in every way we can. We need to reduce their power by challenging the legitimacy of this parliament. Perhaps at least some did this by challenging the parliament and the constitutional assembly in the courts, trying to bring it down that way. And gradually, during the spring of 2013, the policy became to bring down Mursi. At that then parliament was already gone, but bring down Mursi through the streets, going to the streets. But again, although not spoken at the time, it was rather clear that what would bring down Mursi would not be the streets themselves, but the streets making the military remove Mursi. So in a way, you can say perhaps that they were playing the deep state against the elected institutions. Deep state, I won't dwell on that here now because of the time. Nice guy, representative of the independent Egyptian judiciary, who has sentenced 183 people to death recently, and then yesterday or something, or a few days ago, 220 people, most prominent being Ahmed Douma, one of the secular activists, to life in prison. And it goes very fast. He doesn't need a long time to do that. Yeah. Bassem Youssef wasn't there when Sisi was granted a medal by King Abdullah. Or I mean, he wasn't able to be on the Egyptian screens. Just final, it may also be a myth that there is, because a lot of debate about this period is that on the premise that if they had only done, if the Muslim Brothers or some others had just done this or that, things would have gone smooth. I think there were, that's probably mistaken. It's they could have chosen revolutionary justice. That many have seen after. They should have cleansed out the military leadership, or not least the police. They should have changed the judges, things like that. Obviously, when they tried to do a little bit of that, they were challenged not only by the deep state, but by the revolutionaries who were saying, now you are Ikhwanizing the state. So it wasn't very easy to do that. They could have, I saw recently an article saying they should have accommodated the NDP. People are drawing now on the Tunisian developments where there is a sort of continued democratic situation where many from the old regime is now taking part in elections and in position, but they managed to keep a system where the Islamists are also involved. So people say now the Egyptians should have accommodated the NDP. Again, that would of course have, I mean, if I'm talking about creating a split with the revolutionaries, that would have infuriated the revolutionaries if the brothers had tried that. They could have done a broader cooperation with secular forces. Yeah, but probably only possible if the brothers refrained from running in elections and winning elections. And they could have avoided running for the presidency, which might have been a good idea actually. But then again, probably they did so because one reason why they did so was that they feared that the parliament would be dissolved. And they feared what would happen then with the scuff in power, the parliament dissolved. They feared being thrown back into jail. So, not easy. Just want to end with this one. If you reflect a bit on that. It's Sisi, it says repairing and cleaning carpets. I don't know who this guy is, but who knows? One day you might need another job. Thank you.